I grew up in Central California, just outside Sacramento, in this small, beat-up house right next to the railroad tracks. I don't know if you've ever lived near a train line, but it's no joke. Every time one of those things went by, the whole house would shake, the dishes in the cabinet would rattle, and I swear the walls were ready to give up and fall apart. It wasn't much, but it was home. For better or worse, it's where I grew up with my mom, my older sister Caitlin, and my younger brother Danny. My dad? Yeah, he wasn't in the picture much. He bailed on us when I was 7. One day he was there, the next day he wasn't. He left my mom for some woman he worked with, and that was pretty much it. I don't have a ton of memories of him from before he left, but I do remember my mom crying a lot that first year. He sent us some money every month, barely enough to call child support, but even that felt like he was just checking a box. He didn't call, didn't visit, didn't do anything to stay connected. It was like he'd decided we were someone else's problem now. My mom was left to hold everything together, and let me tell you, she worked her ass off. She was a cashier at this local supermarket, pulling in about $2,000 a month, which wasn't much for a family of 4. She had this uncanny ability to stretch every dollar. I don't know how she did it. Shopping sales, clipping coupons, probably going without a lot of things for herself. But she made it work. We always had food on the table, even if it was spaghetti 4 nights a week, and the lights never got shut off. Caitlin, my older sister, was kind of like a second mom to Danny and me. She was 3 years older than me and was always the one helping with homework, making sure we didn't kill each other, and keeping things running smoothly when mom was at work. Even as a teenager, Caitlin was responsible in a way that made the rest of us look like slackers. She started tutoring kids in the neighborhood to make extra money and saved up for college practically from the moment she learned how to count. Now Caitlin's the family success story. She went to college, then med school, and now she's a doctor with this picture-perfect life. She married another doctor, and they have this massive house in the Bay Area that's all white walls and modern furniture. Whenever she posts pictures online, it looks like something out of a home design magazine. It's hard not to feel a little overshadowed, honestly. As for me, I've done okay. I went to college too and got a degree in marketing. I wouldn't call my job glamorous, but it's steady, and I'm good at it. It pays the bills, and I'm proud of what I've managed to accomplish, especially considering where we started. Then there's Danny. He's the youngest, 2 years behind me, and if Caitlin and I are 2 sides of the same coin, Danny's the outlier. He's always been, let's say, complicated. Growing up, he was the one constantly testing boundaries, pushing buttons, and finding new ways to stress everyone out. He'd skip school, get into fights, and sneak out of the house at night. Mom was already stretched so thin that she didn't have the energy to deal with him most of the time. Caitlin tried, but Danny wasn't the type to listen to lectures or advice. After high school, Danny's life didn't get any more stable. He bounced between dead-end temp jobs and always seemed to have some excuse for why nothing worked out. One time it was the boss who had it out for him. Another time it was the hours that didn't respect his time. There was always something, always someone else to blame. Our relationship has always been rocky. Growing up, he used to pick fights with me over the dumbest things, who got the bigger slice of cake, who got to use the TV, stupid stuff like that. But as we got older, those fights started to feel more personal. I think he resents me for having some stability in my life. He'd make these passive-aggressive comments about how I was mom's favorite, or how I had it easy because I didn't have to deal with the same struggles he did. I've tried to talk to him about it, but it's like talking to a brick wall. Every time I try to reach out, he either brushes me off or gets defensive. It's exhausting. I've started to keep my distance because, honestly, it's just easier that way. But it's hard not to feel guilty about it. He's my brother, and I know he's struggling, but how much am I supposed to take before I just stop trying? So that's where things stood for most of my life. My mom working herself to the bone, Caitlin living her dream life, me trying to keep my head above water, and Danny, well, being Danny. Felt like we were all stuck in these roles that we couldn't break out of. But looking back, I realized that things weren't as stable as they seemed. I had no idea at the time, but the cracks in our family were about to split wide open. And when they did, nothing was ever going to be the same. Life didn't really start looking up for me until college. After graduating, I got my first real job at a startup. It was one of those scrappy little companies where everyone wore 5 different hats and worked crazy hours. But I loved it. I got in early, learned fast, and started climbing the ladder. The company eventually exploded in a way none of us could have imagined. Over the years, we went from a handful of employees crammed into a shared office space to being one of the biggest names in IT. By the time I hit my 18th year there, I was the vice president of marketing. I'll admit it felt good. I'd worked my ass off to get there, and the payoff was incredible, literally. When the company sold, my share came out to a cool $5 million. I remember sitting in my kitchen with the check in my hand, just staring at it. $5 million. I kept running my fingers over the numbers, making sure it was real. It was more money than I ever thought I'd see in my lifetime, let alone all at once. The first thing I did was buy my mom a house. She'd spent so many years struggling to keep a roof over our heads. It only felt right to give her a place where she could finally relax. I found a beautiful little house in Sacramento for $750,000. 3 bedrooms, a big yard, the works. Watching her cry when I handed her the keys was one of the best moments of my life. After that, I let myself splurge. I traveled for a while, Italy, Japan, Australia, just ticking places off my bucket list. When I was ready to settle down, I bought myself a house in Los Angeles. It was everything I'd ever wanted. A sleek, modern place with floor-to-ceiling windows, a pool in the backyard, and a view of the hills that felt like it belonged on a postcard. And then there was Grace. Grace was, well, Grace. We met at this ridiculous networking event that I didn't even want to go to. She was stunning, long blonde hair, perfect smile, the kind of woman who turned heads wherever she went. I'll admit I was smitten. She was smart too, working as a PR consultant for some high-profile clients. We hit it off immediately, and 6 months later we were married. Looking back, I can admit that Grace was probably what some people would call a trophy wife. She was gorgeous, charming, and always knew how to make an impression. At the time, I thought we were perfect for each other. She loved the life I could provide. Fancy dinners, vacations, the kind of lifestyle I never thought I'd be able to afford. And for a while, things were great. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Grace wasn't exactly the settling down type. She loved attention, craved it honestly, and I started to notice how often she'd flirt with other men. At first, I tried to brush it off as harmless. She's just friendly, I told myself. But the nagging feeling in the pit of my stomach wouldn't go away. Things came to a head when I found out she was cheating on me. But here's the twist. The guy she was cheating with wasn't some random stranger. It was my brother, Danny. Yeah. Let that sink in for a minute. My brother. The same Danny who used to pick fights with me over who got to watch cartoons. The same Danny who always seemed to resent me for having my life together. The same Danny who I'd spent years trying to help, even when he wouldn't lift a finger to help himself. That Danny. I found out by accident, if you can even call it that. Grace had been acting weird for weeks. More secretive than usual, taking phone calls in another room, making up excuses to go out late at night. One night, I decided to check her phone while she was in the shower. I know, not my proudest moment, but something didn't feel right. And there it was. Messages between her and Danny. Explicit messages. Things I can't unsee no matter how hard I try. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the phone. When I confronted her, she didn't even deny it. She just stood there, arms crossed, looking more annoyed than anything else. "You were never around," she said. Danny made me feel appreciated. I kicked her out that same night. As for Danny, I didn't even bother confronting him. I was too angry, too disgusted, too everything. I thought that was the worst of it, but then came the real bombshell. Grace and I had a son together, or so I thought. He was 4 years old at the time. This sweet, energetic little boy who I adored more than anything. But after everything that happened, I couldn't shake the doubts. I ordered a DNA test. I almost didn't want to know the results, but I had to. When they came back, it confirmed what I was already dreading. My son wasn't my son. He was Danny's. I felt like my entire world had been ripped out from under me. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my family, my marriage, it was all a lie. Grace, Danny, even my own child. Nothing was what it seemed. I've spent the last year trying to pick up the pieces, but I don't even know where to start. How do you move on from something like that? How do you trust anyone ever again? The day I got the DNA test results felt like the universe was kicking me while I was already down. I couldn't even open the envelope at first. I just stared at it for hours, the weight of what it might say crushing me. When I finally ripped it open and read the words confirming that my son was actually Danny's, it felt like my entire body went numb. I don't even know how to describe the mix of anger, betrayal, and heartbreak that hit me all at once. Grace had already destroyed our marriage. But this was something else entirely. I wasn't just losing my wife. I was losing the son I thought was mine. The little boy I'd tucked into bed every night and taught to ride a bike. Suddenly, he wasn't my son. And then there was Danny, my brother, my own flesh and blood. He didn't just stab me in the back. He went for the jugular. He took my wife and my son in one fell swoop, and he didn't even have the decency to feel guilty about it. If that wasn't enough chaos for one lifetime, Danny's wife, Angela, found out about the whole thing. She'd been married to him for 6 years, and they had 2 kids together. A sweet little girl and a baby boy who had just turned 1. Angela was a good woman, way better than Danny deserved, and she was absolutely blindsided. I didn't tell her about the affair. She found out on her own when Danny, in his infinite stupidity, left some incriminating texts on his unlocked phone. When Angela saw the messages, she packed up her kids and went straight to her parents' house in Boston. She didn't even bother confronting Danny, just left a note on the counter saying she was done. I don't blame her for leaving. Honestly, I wish I'd had her sense of self-preservation earlier. At least she didn't stick around trying to fix what was already broken beyond repair. The fallout from all this destroyed what little stability I had left. The divorce from Grace was an absolute nightmare. She lawyered up hard, and even though she was the one who cheated, California's divorce laws didn't care about that. In the end, I lost $2.5 million in the settlement. $2.5 million just gone like it was Monopoly money. And as if that wasn't bad enough, I had to give up my Tesla Model S. That car was my pride and joy, and watching Grace drive off in it felt like the final insult. By the time the dust settled, I was left with barely a fraction of the money I'd worked so hard for. It felt like I'd gone from having everything to having absolutely nothing. I knew I couldn't stay in Los Angeles. The city that had once felt like the pinnacle of my success now felt suffocating, a constant reminder of everything I'd lost. So, I packed up what little I had left and left California behind. I ended up in New Mexico, of all places. I don't even know why I picked it. Maybe because it was far away from everyone and everything. I found this old trailer for $1,200. A rusty piece of junk that probably should have been scrapped years ago. But it was cheap and it was mine. Living in that trailer was a far cry from the life I'd built in Los Angeles. Gone were the sleek glass walls and the infinity pool. Now I had a leaky roof, creaky floors, and a view of endless desert instead of the city lights. Some days it felt like I'd hit rock bottom. Other days it felt like a fresh start. I spent a lot of time sitting outside at night, staring up at the stars and wondering how the hell my life had gone so wrong. I thought about Grace, about Danny, about the son I'd lost. I thought about all the choices I'd made that led me here. I'm not gonna lie, there were moments when I wondered if it was even worth trying to rebuild. But the funny thing about hitting rock bottom is that there's nowhere to go but up. And as much as I hated where I was, part of me was determined to find a way out of the mess. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing for sure. I couldn't let Grace and Danny be the end of my story. I had to believe there was more waiting for me on the other side of all this chaos. Starting over wasn't easy. After everything that happened, I felt like a shell of the person I used to be. Los Angeles, my career, my money, my reputation, it was all behind me. I ended up in Gallup, New Mexico, a small town where life felt slower and quieter, like the universe was giving me a chance to catch my breath. Gallup wasn't anything like the glitzy, fast-paced world I'd come from. The average income was around $45,000 a year, and it showed. People weren't flashy. They were just trying to get by. The streets were lined with modest houses, small businesses, and the occasional chain store. It was a far cry from the sprawling mansions and luxury cars I'd grown used to, but it was exactly what I needed. I settled in a trailer park on the edge of town, surrounded by scrubby desert and a clear view of the horizon. My trailer wasn't much to look at. Rusty, a little cramped, and prone to leaking when it rained, but it was mine. For $1,200, it was all I could afford, and honestly, it felt good to have something to call my own again, no matter how humble it was. Life in Gallup was lonely at first. I didn't know anyone, and most of my days were spent sitting in my trailer, trying not to let my thoughts spiral. But then I met my neighbor, Lauren. Lauren lived 2 trailers down with her 4-year-old son, Lucas. I first noticed her when she was out on her tiny front porch, fixing a squeaky screen door. She was petite, with dark hair tied back in a loose ponytail and an air of quiet determination about her. Lucas was playing in the dirt nearby, running toy trucks through the sand and narrating some kind of adventure to himself. I don't know why, but something about the way she carried herself caught my attention. She looked tired, worn out in a way that went beyond just a bad day, but there was a kindness in her eyes that made me want to know her story. We started talking one day when I was struggling to get my old truck started. It was this beat-up Ford I'd picked up for $600. And it had a nasty habit of refusing to cooperate. Lauren came over with a toolbox and offered to help. I wasn't sure if she actually knew what she was doing or if she just felt sorry for me, but either way, we ended up talking for over an hour. That was the beginning of our friendship. Lauren told me about her life, how she'd moved to Gallup after divorcing her ex-husband, who had been violent and unpredictable. She didn't go into too much detail, but the look on her face said enough. She'd gotten out for the sake of Lucas, determined to give him a better life, even if it meant starting from scratch. She worked as a cashier at a local pharmacy, earning just enough to keep the lights on and food on the table. It wasn't much, but she made it work, stretching every dollar the same way my mom used to. Lucas was a great kid. He had this boundless energy and curiosity that reminded me a little of myself at that age, back when life still felt simple. He'd come running over to my trailer whenever he saw me outside, dragging a toy or a crayon drawing to show me. It didn't take long for me to start looking forward to seeing him. Meanwhile, I was trying to piece my own life back together. Money was tight and finding work wasn't easy. I went to every temp agency in town, filling out applications and hoping for a callback. After a couple of weeks, I finally landed a job at a warehouse, earning $25 an hour. It wasn't glamorous, and it wasn't what I'd spent years building a career for, but it was honest work. The warehouse job was physically exhausting, lifting heavy boxes, loading trucks, and working long shifts, but it gave me a sense of purpose that I hadn't felt in a long time. I was rebuilding one paycheck at a time, and for the first time in years, I started to feel like I could see a future ahead of me. Lauren and I grew closer over the months. We'd sit on her porch after work, sipping cheap beers and watching Lucas play. She had this way of making even the simplest conversations feel meaningful, and I found myself opening up to her in ways I hadn't with anyone else. I told her about Grace, about Danny, about everything I'd lost. She didn't judge me or offer empty platitudes. She just listened. In return, she shared more of her own story. Her ex-husband had been the kind of man who looked charming on the surface but turned cruel behind closed doors. She'd stayed longer than she should have, hoping things would get better. But when Lucas was born, she knew she had to leave. She packed up her car one night and drove until she reached Gallup, where she'd heard about an affordable trailer park with decent schools nearby. Hearing her story made me respect her even more. Lauren had been through hell and back, but she'd come out the other side stronger and more determined than ever. It was impossible not to admire her. As the weeks turned into months, I started to realize just how much Lauren and Lucas had come to mean to me. They weren't just my neighbors. They were my friends, my support system, my little piece of hope in a life that had felt hopeless for far too long. For the first time in what felt like forever, I started to believe that maybe, just maybe, this new beginning could turn into something good. Lauren and Lucas quickly became the best part of my life in Gallup. It started with little things, helping her fix a leaky faucet, picking up groceries when I noticed her fridge was looking a little bare. She'd been so independent for so long. She hesitated to accept help at first, But over time, she let her guard down. I started spending more and more time with them. It was easy to fall into a routine, helping Lucas with his homework, joining them for dinner, or just sitting on Lauren's porch after a long day at work. At first, I told myself it was just friendship, that I was helping out because they deserved it. But the truth was, I cared about them in a way I hadn't cared about anyone in years. Lucas was the kind of kid who could make anyone smile. He had this goofy laugh that came out whenever he told one of his nonsensical jokes. And he'd get so excited showing me his latest Lego creations. Spending time with him felt like healing some of the wounds Grace and Danny had left behind. I couldn't be the father I thought I was to my son, but maybe I could be something good for Lucas. As for Lauren, she was everything I didn't know I needed. She was kind, funny, and stronger than anyone I'd ever met. She didn't just survive what life threw at her. She found a way to keep moving forward, no matter how hard things got. I admired her, respected her, and, slowly but surely, I started to fall for her. We never had some big, dramatic moment where our friendship turned into something more. It was gradual, like the tide coming in. One evening, after Lucas had gone to bed, we were sitting on her porch, talking about everything and nothing. The stars were out, and the desert was quiet except for the occasional rustle of the wind. She leaned her head on my shoulder, and I didn't pull away. It felt natural, like it was where we were always meant to end up. After that, things started to shift. We spent even more time together, and I found myself going out of my way to make her life easier. I'd pick up groceries for her on my way home from work, mow the tiny patch of grass in front of her trailer, or surprise Lucas with little toys I found at the thrift store. One day, I noticed her old car. A beat-up sedan that looked like it was held together by duct tape and hope was acting up again. It wouldn't start, and when it did, it made this awful grinding noise that made me wince just hearing it. She tried to brush it off, saying she'd take it to the shop when she could afford it, but I could see the stress in her eyes. So I decided to do something about it. I found a used 2016 Toyota Corolla in good condition for $8,500 and bought it for her. When I handed her the keys, she looked at me like I just handed her the world. "Jason," she said, her voice shaking, "I can't accept this." "Sure you can," I replied, smiling. "You need it. And I can't stand the thought of you and Lucas breaking down in that death trap." She hugged me so tightly I could barely breathe. Seeing her and Lucas drive off in that reliable little car, knowing they were safer and more comfortable, was worth every penny. Our relationship grew stronger every day. We started talking about the future, about what it might look like if we built a life together. Lauren had been hesitant at first, worried about getting too close to anyone after everything she'd been through with her ex-husband. But slowly, she started to open up. We'd sit up late at night, imagining a house with more space for Lucas to play, maybe even a backyard big enough for a dog. Lauren joked about how she'd finally get a kitchen with enough counter space to bake cookies without feeling cramped. I told her about how I'd always dreamed of having a family, of being the kind of dad my own father never was. For the first time in years, I felt like I could see a future that wasn't filled with anger and regret. Lauren and Lucas gave me something to hope for, something to work toward. And as scary as it was to let myself believe in that again, I knew I couldn't let this chance slip away. They weren't just my neighbors anymore. They were my family, or at least they could be. I was determined to do whatever it took to make that dream a reality. By the time I decided to propose to Lauren, it felt like the most natural thing in the world. I'd never thought I'd get another chance at love after what Grace and Danny had put me through. But Lauren and Lucas had turned my life around in ways I never expected. They made me believe in family again, in trust and hope. I knew I wanted to spend the rest of my life with them. I'd been saving up for a ring for months, ever since Lauren and I started seriously talking about our future. I wanted something that would show her how much she meant to me, something that symbolized the new life we were building together. After weeks of searching, I found the perfect one. A diamond engagement ring that cost me $12,000. It was more than I'd ever thought I'd spend on something like that, but Lauren was worth it. The perfect moment to propose came at a corporate party. It wasn't exactly the setting I'd envisioned. It was a casual holiday event thrown by the warehouse where I worked, but I'd waited long enough, and I didn't want to miss another opportunity. The party was held in this small, dimly lit event hall. The company had tried to dress it up with fairy lights and cheap decorations, but it was still pretty modest. Lauren looked incredible that night, wearing a simple navy blue dress that somehow made her look like she'd stepped out of a magazine. I couldn't take my eyes off her. I'd planned everything out with the help of a few coworkers. Just as the music shifted to a slow song, I pulled her aside to the center of the dance floor. The room quieted down, and I could feel every set of eyes on us. My heart was pounding, but when I looked at Lauren, all the nerves melted away. I dropped to one knee and pulled the ring out of my pocket. "Lauren," I said, my voice shaking just enough to be noticeable. "You and Lucas have changed my life in ways I can't even begin to explain. You've made me believe in love again, and I can't imagine my future without you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes wide with surprise. Then tears started streaming down her face, and she nodded so enthusiastically that everyone around us started cheering. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder, "Yes, Jason. Of course, yes." The room erupted in applause, but I barely noticed. All I could see was Lauren, smiling through her tears as I slid the ring onto her finger. I kissed her, and for the first time in years, I felt like everything was exactly where it was meant to be. The weeks after the proposal were a whirlwind. Lauren and I dove headfirst into planning our wedding. We kept it simple. Nothing too fancy or over the top. Just something small and intimate where we could celebrate with the people who mattered most. But as excited as we were about the wedding, life had one more surprise in store for us. It happened one morning while we were sitting at the tiny kitchen table in her trailer, sipping coffee and planning out the day. Lauren had been quieter than usual, and I could tell something was on her mind. "Jason," she said finally, her voice soft but steady, "I have something to tell you." I set my coffee down, my heart skipping a beat. "What is it?" She reached across the table and took my hand, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth.
"I'm pregnant."
For a moment, I just stared at her, letting the words sink in. Then it hit me all at once. A rush of joy, disbelief, and overwhelming gratitude. "You're serious?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. She nodded, her eyes shining. "We're going to have a baby." I stood up so fast I nearly knocked over my chair, pulling her into my arms and spinning her around. She laughed, a sound so pure and happy that it made my chest ache. "This is the best news I've ever heard," I said, and I meant it. The pregnancy brought a new kind of excitement into our lives. We spent hours talking about baby names, decorating a nursery in her trailer, and imagining what our little family would look like. Lucas was thrilled at the idea of becoming a big brother, already making plans for all the adventures he'd take the baby on. For the first time in years, I felt like the universe was giving me a second chance. Not just at love, but at building the family I'd always dreamed of. I knew it wouldn't be perfect. I knew there would be challenges. But for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of the future. With Lauren by my side, I felt ready to face whatever came next. And this time, I knew I wouldn't be facing it alone. Just when I thought I'd finally found peace, my past came back to haunt me. It started with a phone call from Caitlin, my older sister. We hadn't spoken much since everything fell apart with Grace and Danny, mostly because every interaction felt strained. Still, when I saw her name on my phone, I hesitated before answering. Maybe part of me hoped she was reaching out to make amends. "Jason," she began, her tone overly sweet, the kind of voice she used when she wanted something. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened. Don't you think it's time to let bygones be bygones?" I frowned, already on edge. "What are you talking about, Caitlin?" She sighed like I was the unreasonable one. "Grace, she's still in love with you, Jason. She's been talking to Mom and me, and she wants to work things out. She made a mistake. Sure, but don't you think everyone deserves a second chance?" The words hit me like a punch to the gut. Grace, after everything she'd done? The woman who cheated on me with my brother, who lied to me for years, and left my life in shambles? And Caitlin thought I should give her a second chance? "You've got to be kidding me," I said, my voice sharp. How can you even suggest that after what she did? She regrets it, Caitlin insisted, her tone shifting to exasperation. We've been talking about it, and we think you two can make it work. Mom agrees. Jason, you can't just throw away everything you had with her. The anger that surged through me was almost blinding. What we had. Caitlin, she had a child with Danny. My son turned out to be my nephew because of her. How do you expect me to just forgive and forget that? She's still family, Caitlin snapped, her frustration boiling over. We all make mistakes, Jason. You're being stubborn and selfish. Mom thinks so too. I hung up without another word, my heart pounding with a mix of rage and disbelief. How could Caitlin, my own sister, side with Grace after everything she'd done? A few days later, I decided to visit my mom to get some answers. Part of me hoped Caitlin was exaggerating, that my mom wouldn't actually support something so absurd. But the moment I walked into her house, I could tell something was off. She greeted me warmly enough, but the conversation quickly turned toward Grace. Jason, she began, her voice cautious. I know things have been hard, but I really think you should hear Grace out. She's been talking to me and Caitlin, and she regrets everything. She wants to make things right.
Ist daher, stunt?
Make things right? Mom, how can you even say that? Do you have any idea what she put me through? What Danny put me through? And you want me to just go back to that? She's the mother of your son, Mom said, her voice firm. She's the mother of Danny's son. I shot back, my voice rising. You expect me to forget that? To forget the years of lies and betrayal? She made a mistake, Mom insisted. People change, Jason. She's trying to do better. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. It wasn't just Caitlin. My own mother was part of this twisted little conspiracy to drag me back into a life I'd fought so hard to escape. I'm with Lauren now, I said, my voice trembling with anger. She's everything Grace could never be. Kind, loyal, honest. We're building a life together, a real family. And I'm not going to let you or Caitlin or anyone else ruin that. Mom frowned, her lips pressed into a thin line. You're throwing away your family, Jason. No, I said, standing up. You threw it away when you decided to side with Grace. I'm done, Mom. I'm done with you, with Caitlin, with all of this. I walked out of that house feeling a strange mix of heartbreak and relief. Cutting ties with my mother and sister wasn't something I'd ever imagined doing, but I knew it was the right decision. They weren't interested in supporting me. They wanted to pull me back into a toxic, broken past. When I got back to Gallup, Lauren was waiting for me on the porch. She could tell something was wrong the moment she saw my face. What happened? She asked, her voice full of concern. I sat down beside her, taking her hand in mine. They wanted me to go back to Grace, I said quietly. Mom and Caitlin, they think I should forgive her, forget everything, and pretend none of it ever happened. Lauren's expression darkened, but she didn't say anything. She just squeezed my hand, letting me know she was there. I told them I'm done, I continued. With Grace, with my mom, with Caitlin. I'm choosing you, Lauren. You and Lucas and this baby. You're my family now. Tears filled her eyes, and she leaned in to kiss me. We're going to be okay, she whispered. For the first time in a long time, I believed her. I wasn't going to let the ghosts of my past ruin the life I was building. Lauren and I had a future together, and nothing, not Grace, not Caitlin, not my mother, was going to take that away from us. After everything we'd been through, life with Lauren finally felt like a fresh start. With Grace and my family in the rearview mirror, I could focus on what really mattered, creating a happy, stable life for us and preparing for the arrival of our baby. Lauren and I spent hours planning our future together, dreaming about the kind of life we wanted to build. The trailer park had been a haven for us, but it was clear we'd outgrown it. Between Lucas running around, Lauren's growing belly, and my desire to give them more, we knew it was time for a change. We started house hunting on weekends, driving around Gallup and the surrounding areas, looking for something that felt like home. Our budget wasn't huge, but we were careful and patient, determined to find the perfect place. One afternoon, We stumbled upon a modest 3-bedroom house on the edge of town. It had a small yard, a sunny kitchen, and enough space for Lucas to have his own room, and for the baby to have a nursery. The house wasn't perfect. The paint was peeling in a few spots, and the fence needed repairs, but it was ours. Signing the paperwork and holding the keys in my hand felt like the first real step toward the new life we were building. Moving in was chaotic but exciting. Lucas ran from room to room, already planning where his toys would go, while Lauren and I laughed and tripped over boxes. By the end of the first day, we were exhausted but happy, sitting on the living room floor surrounded by takeout containers and dreaming about what the future would hold. As Lauren's due date got closer, we threw ourselves into baby preparations. We painted the nursery a soft yellow and filled it with hand-me-downs, thrift store finds, and a few new pieces we'd splurged on. Every little detail felt important, like we were building a space filled with love and hope for this new chapter of our lives. Lucas was thrilled at the idea of becoming a big brother. He talked to Lauren's belly, telling the baby about his favorite cartoons and promising to share his toys. Watching him so full of excitement and wonder made me feel like I was doing something right. One night, as we lay in bed, Lauren rested her head on my chest and traced circles on my arm. "Do you think we'll have more kids after this one?" she asked softly. The question caught me off guard, but in the best way. "You'd want more?" I asked, smiling. She nodded, her eyes shining. "I've always dreamed of having a big family. Lucas was a miracle, and now this baby, I just feel like there's so much love left to give." I kissed the top of her head, overwhelmed by how lucky I was to have her. "Then we'll have more," I said. "As many as we can handle. Whatever the future holds, we'll face it together." For the first time in years, I felt truly content. I wasn't looking over my shoulder, waiting for the next disaster to strike, or dwelling on the mistakes of my past. My life with Lauren and the kids was everything I could have hoped for. A chance to start over, to be the man I wanted to be, and to create the kind of family I'd always dreamed of. The day Lauren went into labor was a blur of excitement and nerves. We rushed to the hospital, holding hands the entire drive. Watching her bring our daughter into the world was the most incredible, humbling experience of my life. When the nurse placed that tiny, squirming baby in my arms, I knew I'd never been happier. We named her Evelyn. She was perfect, tiny fingers, a button nose, and the loudest cry I'd ever heard. Lucas was smitten from the moment he saw her, proudly announcing to everyone in the hospital that he was her big brother. Bringing Evelyn home was like the final puzzle piece clicking into place. Our house felt full, not just of people, but of love, laughter, and the promise of everything yet to come. I don't know what the future holds, but for the first time in my life, I'm not scared of it. I've left the pain and betrayal behind, choosing instead to focus on the family I found and the life we're building together. Lauren, Lucas, and Evelyn are my world now. And as I look around at our little home, filled with the sounds of children laughing and the warmth of love, I know I've finally found the happiness I've been searching for all along.